Hey everybody, today I'm talking about Rialto, which is an older Stefan Feld game dating back to 2013. This one accommodates 2 to 5 players and takes about 45 to 60 minutes to play. It's a area majority and card drafting game set in Venice with the old Rialto bridge here. I like the box art here, nice minimalist look, and the board looks like this. So thematically this game doesn't really hold much weight. So it's very much a game about controlling these regions, trying to get points at the end of the game. You've got all these different sections here in Venice, all labelled with these numbers at the beginning of the game. So these are dished out randomly and they're going to determine the order in which these islands are resolved in. So I've got this one here, this kind of pawn here that represents which island's going to start, so at number 1. Mechanically the game is pretty simple and broken down into 3 pretty simple stages, which are illustrated on the board here. We're also going to have a player board where we're going to start with a different building each, a bit of money and some pieces that you can put down on the board, but you've got the potential to bring a lot more into your supply, and I've only set up for 1 player here, but naturally everybody would have their own piece. There's also this track up the board here which is very important, called the Doge track, and this is going to be a pivotal piece in terms of breaking ties. So depending on the player count, we're going to divide up or going to lay out a number of different columns depending on that player count. So in a 2-player game you would put 3 columns, in a 3-player game you put 4 columns, in a 4-player game you put 5 columns, in a 5-player game you put 6 columns. So it's always 1 more than the number of players. And the idea is we're going to draft one of these columns of cards, so you're actually drafting cards as a kind of job lot to determine the actions that you're going to do at the end of that round. And not only are you going to get that column of cards, you're also going to draw 2 off the top of the deck as well. So your opponents have got a pretty good idea of what you can do during the round, but not perfect information because, as I said, you've got 2 blind draws there, which could be anything. So let's talk about what all the different cards do. So you've got the this symbol here, which represents to the Doge track, and whoever's going to play the most of these cards during the round, well, first off, everybody's going to move up a number of spaces on this track equal to the amount of cards they've played. So let's say I played 3 cards, the blue played 2 cards, and the red played 1 card. Oh, sorry, the green played 1 card. Whoever's played the most gets an additional push along as well. So this is a game where if you kind of win a certain one of these pools of cards being played, then you're going to get an additional little bonus as well. So you are incentivized to lead the way on probably a couple of these criteria throughout. The coins is pretty simple. So the coins are going to get you a coin for each card you played. And again, whoever's played the most cards is going to get an additional coin. The buildings lets you get building tiles depending on the number of cards you've played. And whoever's played the most building cards gets to take 1 level higher. So for example, if I played, let's say I played 2 building cards and my opponents only played 1, my opponents would get to take a level 1 building, I would get to take a level 3 building, or up to a level 3 building, because not only do I get to get the 2 that I've played of, but because I played the most, I get to take 1 level higher. So again, that slightly incentivized to play at least 1 more than your opponents. And as mentioned before, the Doge track here is going to break the ties if there's a tie for that majority. So always being high up on this track is almost paramount importance. Let's talk about what some of the buildings do. So the green ones generally let you draw more cards into your hand and hold more cards if you get to the top layer here. The yellow ones are generally used during the actual action phase when you are resolving these cards. So this one here lets you pass to wait and see what other players are doing. This one here lets you use a card as another card. That one here lets you use a card as a wild. Lets you just have a wild building or a wild card. That one there lets you convert 1 card into 2 of another card. The blue ones tend to be resolved at the end of the round, where you can upgrade 1 building to the next level. You can get a point and a new worker into your pool. You can move the Doge track along, and ultimately you just get more points. So that's what all the different buildings do. You can only ever have 7 at a time, but you can always replace them if you want to change your mind throughout. So that's how the building cards are going to work. You've got the bridge cards. Now, the bridge cards are interesting because for every card you play, you're going to get a point, and I think if you don't play any, then you're going to score negative points. But also, whoever plays the most of those is going to get to place one of these bridge tiles here. Now, these are interesting because they have 2 different denominations of points on them. and you're going to place them anywhere on the board on these kind of highlighted symbols here. So see, for example, I put this one down like that. Now these values are important because when it comes to scoring these different regions, they're going to be scored based on the values of all the different kind of denominations pointing towards that island. So at the moment, this one's going to be worth 5 points, whereas this one is going to be worth 3 points. And as you can probably tell, the more you build here, you can kind of tailor this to your advantage if you are constantly winning that bridge draft by pointing the higher value points to the islands that you're controlling. The gondola actions correlate to getting more workers into your pool. So for every card you play, you get to take one of these and put it back into your supply, ready to be deployed later. But additionally, whoever wins that action is going to get to play one of these gondola tiles. And these gondola tiles, as you can see, have a value of 1 on both sides. So a bit like these ones here with the bridge tiles, if you know an opponent is doing particularly well in an island and you've got no way of catching up, then you can always play one of those to make sure that they're not going to get much points or many points at the end of the game. So I really do like that, and that's a really cool, mechanism there. And finally, you've got the symbol here, which represents how many people you're going to deploy in the current region. So like the other ones, if I played 3 cards, I would get to play 3 people into the current region, and whoever plays the most gets to deploy another one. And it's going to be a bit of a battling for position there. You've also got a wild card here, and that one can represent any single card or any of the other cards. And you can always choose to not play cards. You can choose to keep them back into your hand for the next round. But bearing in mind that after you've done your card draft and drawn the additional ones off the top, you can only ever go back down to, you have to discard down to 7 cards unless you've got powers that say otherwise. So that's going to be the basic game, the flow of the game, or the main kind of action part of the game. Then you go on to phase 3, as I mentioned, where you can activate your 3, your level, or your blue buildings, I should say. There are other incentives here in order to basically, if you control all these southern islands, then you're going to get a bonus of 5 points if you're the first to do that. And again, with the northern islands, you get the same. And that's going to be how the game's going to play out until all the different islands are going to be resolved. So once the level 1's gone, you'd move on to the level 2 or to number 2. And then this one will be resolved. And as the game goes on, more and more of these tiles are going to be placed, depending on who's doing well where, and just trying to tailor this to your advantage. And then at the end of the game, all the different islands are going to be resolved, giving points on majorities. The points equal to the number of points on the gondolas and bridges. Whoever's in second place is going to get half of the points rounded down, and whoever's in third is going to get half of those points rounded down. So that's going to be how Rialto is going to play out. It's a pretty simple game. So let's talk about my actual thoughts on the game. So first off, I really do like the card drafting. Now, card drafting isn't one of my favourite mechanisms, but I particularly do enjoy card drafting games when you take communal lots or job lots, and you have to weigh up about what you want here. And additionally, as I said, I do like the fact that your opponents have a pretty good idea on the field you're strong in. So, for example, if I took this card, they know I'm going to at least compete in the bridges or the Doge track. But they don't know perfect information because I'm always taking cards off the top and can be having cards from my previous round. So even though there is, a somewhat random, distribution here, you've got some autonomy and some mitigation in terms of holding on to cards from existing rounds. For example, if you know you can't really compete for maybe deploying your pawns onto that certain spot, and you really want to focus on the next phase and deploying there, then you can hold back on those. So there are some good decisions there in what you're going to keep hold of, that little bit of hand management. Also, you've got some mitigation with the buildings here, the green ones that you draw more cards, and so on. So you've got, again, a bit more mitigation there, and you're not so subject to the luck of the draw. There's also, of course, the idea that you need to basically dabble in all of these fields. You can't just neglect one of them because you need to be competing in the Doge track in order to break those ties. You need to have money because you need money to activate the buildings, and you want the buildings because they give you good powers. You want the bridges because otherwise you're going to be subject to people just giving you all the rubbish amount of points, and you're not going to be getting points by playing them in the first place. You want to be deploying your workers, but you can't keep deploying your workers unless you pay the gondolas to get workers into your supply. So again, you can't neglect anything, and kind of knowing when to do things and when to pull the trigger on maybe stockpiling on certain actions is important, and more importantly, knowing when to use these wildcards is so important because player order is ultra particular in this game, where knowing what other players are going to reveal and what they're going to play from round to round is important because you need to know when to dedicate these wildcards. So I do like that decision space there. The game ticks along quite nicely in terms of moving from island to island. Each round to round isn't particularly long. It certainly isn't one of these long, drawn-out games. And for an area control game, it plays pretty quickly. You don't get many of them that play in that 45 to 60-minute mark. Balance-wise, it kind of ties in to the importance of all the different fields here. It's not there's no real scope for imbalance here. I think the only thing is the order of the turn drafting, of the card drafting. But that's your fault really. If you've neglected the Doge track and you're drafting last every time, then that's kind of tough. And you've kind of laid your bed really. The mechanisms, I do like the way it's boiled down into 3 very simple phases. Obviously the main crux being the action phase. I will say that the way it's resolved, because you kind of play all your Doge cards and then resolve it, you play all your money cards and then resolve it, it's a bit stop and start, and it doesn't flow quite as well as a lot of maybe more recent games do. However, I understand the way it plays because that's where the gameplay lies, is almost the order of these cards being played and knowing when to hold them back and knowing when to kind of reveal your hand really. But it's kind of a weird scale of things where it doesn't make the game flow wonderfully, but it does add a lot of the interest in the gameplay. So yeah, the kind of uptime and the way it ticks along isn't great, but it also is almost necessary. The replayability, I'm a bit in two minds about this one because there isn't loads of things you can try. I mean, you're going to get a pretty good idea of what the buildings do after one game, and yeah, maybe you can go for those different focus from game to game in terms of getting the high level buildings. But ultimately, it's one of those games where you are getting what you're getting, and you're reacting to what the cards are available and your current situation. It's not a game where you can try lots of different things, but at the same time, it's more tactical than anything, and it's going to keep your engagement that way rather than trying different things from game to game. The interaction is good. I mean, I love the fact that you can change the values of the different regions, again, by not only helping yourself but by hurting others as well. I do like that. I think there's some real good interaction in the card draft, some holding back some information here and stuff. So yeah, it does have a good level of interaction, and for an area control game, it's not a game where you are demolishing people and kicking them out of regions. You're basically just tailoring the board to suit you more than your opponents, rather than smashing anything they've created. So I think the interaction is injected quite well into this one. Aesthetically, I like the way the game looks. I will admit, it has a classic throwback look. Even though I like the way the game looks, I think functionally it has some issues. So first off, the islands themselves aren't the easiest to differentiate from one another. Not overly important, but maybe in terms of the bridge layouts and things, it could be a bit clearer. But I visually, I think it looks quite nice. My biggest issue is the score track. So the score track, as you can see, they don't have any numbers on apart from these here. And you actually put the discs between the spots here, and it just is a bit off-putting, but it's a very small fault there. I think the cards look okay. They're all clear on what they do, or clear on what they represent. So again, the components are a mixed bag. Functionally okay, but a bit confusing at points. And quality-wise, generally good. I think we'll say that these player boards are very thin. They're like almost paper, so they're not great. But the coins are fine, the buildings are fine, and the general quality of the cards and board is fine. The theme, there's no theme here. It's just set in Venice. You know, it's based on the different islands and things. Very much a skin, but you know, it does have all the different region names and things. So I think if you're a fan of Venice and if you've been there, it's quite a nice little thing to to remind you of that. But it's a Feld game, so you know, if you're playing a Feld game, you're probably not that interested in theme. Scalability, it works well at, I suppose, most player counts. There is, and for a two-player game actually, it works okay because there is a slight modification in the box where you almost play, you have the option to play with a dummy player, which only focuses on deploying their workers onto different spots. So if you want that almost you know, AI that you want to compete with to make things a bit more interesting, you can choose to do that, and the housekeeping is very low for that as well. So don't be off-put if you like the look of the game but you mainly play with two players. You're still going to get a bit of enjoyment out of this one. Maybe not quite as good as, you know, that 3, 4 or 5 player mark, but it's still close. You know, you're not missing out on a whole lot, and it's not one of those games where it just doesn't work at 2. And comparison-wise, yes, there are a lot of area majority and area control games, but I think the mix of the card drafting and the board itself work well together. Again, I like the way you have to focus on everything and you can't just neglect one thing. So yeah, I think the two separate and distinct mechanisms do tie in together really well, which, you know, Stefan Feld is great at doing that. Mechanically, he's a genius, and you know, this certainly is well put together. So yeah, overall, I do really enjoy this game. I can certainly see its you know, its strong points. I keep going back to it, but I like the way you can't neglect anything. The bridges are interesting. You need the coins in order to build the buildings, and the buildings let you do loads of cool things. The order of the islands is important because you need to know when you're going to play those cards, because you can't go back and add, well, you can, but you can't go back and add major changes onto islands that have already been resolved. You can only do it with, when I think it's when you play the gondolas, you can add another worker onto either side of that island. So you can kind of be a bit sneaky and sneak in at the end, but generally it's resolved from point to point to point. And, you know, knowing when to play things and knowing when to commit to things and maybe let things go is important. So there's some good decisions there. And additionally, you know, with the buildings, there's some good decisions there, what you want to focus on. You always want to be going up this track here and certainly not slipping too far behind to the point where you're never breaking ties and you're always drafting last. So yeah, there's some good decisions here, and certainly tactical and strategic options. So I do like that. Yeah, overall, a lot of fun. It's probably not, well, certainly not one of my favourite Stefan Feld games, but it does have a lot of his feel in terms of being mechanically well put together. If anything, the only thing that puts me off is, as I said, the way that all the different actions and the stages are resolved, because it's very stop and start rather than just getting it out of the way quickly. It's, you know, it's very formulaic, but that's part and parcel of the game, really. So give this one a, you know, check this one out if you like your Feld games and you want a more pure area majority game, but certainly not up there with the best of them. But at the same time, you know, I love Stefan Feld, and even his, or my least favourite games of his are still really good. So that is Rialto. Yeah, I can see why it's not one of his biggest titles, but still a strong design and some fun to be had from this one. So I hope you enjoyed the review. Please hit like and subscribe to my channel if you have. You can also check out my other videos and support me on Patreon and follow me on Instagram. For everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.